the cloud is the way to go, right? Provision in the cloud, deploy once, scale many times, or write once, deploy many. And then the other one is a bit convoluted, but I think it's important, which is automation should not be work cell centric. It should be workflow centric.
Weaving like DNA strands on a fascinating roller coaster of endless learning, experimentation, and discovery of technology, where the destination is not the end and the journey is the most fun. This is the Helical Brew. With your hosts, Mike, Sura, Jeff, and Elizabeth.
Welcome, Helical Brew viewers. This is episode 20, and I'm very pleased to introduce our guest for episode 20, Mostafa ElSayed from Automata, the founder and CEO. We're very glad to have him with us. In this episode, we're going to talk through a lot of things, lab automation, but also what Automata started out as prior to becoming a mainstream company in the laboratory automation space. I'm very keen to learn about that backstory and the pivoting along the way. So we are going to talk about really connected labs, how Automata is scaling scientific automation. As we all know, laboratory automation is an evolving area, and it's becoming more and more important to the research engines behind all of the products that we see out of the market as consumers. But automation is such a huge part of that today, as we all know. Cloud-connected workflows, all those things. We're looking forward to talking with Mostafa about how that's coming about. So, Mostafa, welcome to the Helical Brew.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. I can tell you've done that 20 times in the past. That was really slick.
I'll take that.
There's podcast voice.
It's a little polished. Yeah, that's spirit in which it was intended.
Well, welcome. Yeah, when I first heard about your company, I remember it was the robotic arm that I first saw. That was something that, but even prior to that, what got you here to this, running a company, a growing company at that?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about the beginnings of your podcast and how, you didn't intend to be 20 episodes into a podcast. I would say that is very similar to the beginnings of Automata. Like many companies, especially startups, I think the beginning of the company was a set of relationships. In this case, me and my co-founder. So, I usually like to introduce myself in a way which was like, look, I don't have a background in robotics. I don't have a background in the life sciences, and I don't have a background in automation. So you should kind of take everything I tell you on those topics with a grain of salt. And I was actually trained as an architect here in London. And I worked in a practice called Hadi Architects, which is known for like fairly progressive architecture. For your American listeners, think like Frank Gehry in Europe. Hopefully that name means something as well. And that's where I met my co-founder Sura, and we both worked in a company of 500 people in a research team of 5. And basically we were an in-house programming team. And again, self-taught, right? You can teach yourself anything on YouTube these days. In our case, it was C++ and C and OpenGL and CUDA programming and these kind of things. And our careers slowly took us to from kind of optimizing architectural geometry problems to learning how to fabricate the stuff we designed on our computers, which meant we started to play with CNC machines, started to play with robots. And we had this kind of defining experience the first time I used an industrial robot. Mike, I know you have a background in industrial robots, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember playing around with my first ABB, kind of like one of the big boys.
Yeah.
And I had this, we both realized the same thing, which was like, okay, this thing costs $100,000, strong enough to kill you. They move around silently. And you program it on something that looks like a Texas Instruments calculator.
Yes.
And
Well said.
and that was kind of the kind of holy shit moment at the time. And 2 years later, after that moment, we were working on robots in our spare time, to be honest, right? I credit the ability to buy a 3D printer for $2,000 for that career path. And we both got PhD offers in 2015, and neither of us wanted to go back to school. But at the same time, we didn't want to go back to work either. And ironically, that was the start of Automata, which is like, I don't want to go do a PhD. I don't want to move to Boston. You don't want to move to Zurich. But I don't want to go back to work either. Let's start a company. We're doing this robot thing on the side. Sounds like a business, right? So I would love to tell you a more intelligent story, but that was the start of Automata at the time.
I feel like that's
fantastic.
all founding starts. I don't want to go to work, but I don't want to go back to school. Let's start my own company.
Yeah,
Make my own work. Yeah.
more or less. And it was like, you have this much in savings. I have this much in savings. Sounds about 6 months of runway. And, we knew our boss would take us back. And, that was, all we cared about for 6 months was like, we're going to try to make this work. And, so the founding spark of Automata was just like two people who had an idea, but more than anything, enjoyed working with each other and had like really incredibly strong complementary skills and all the time in the world for a 6-month period to just focus on what we were doing. And I think a lot of you will have hopefully had that experience in your career. Those periods are magic. And that
Absolutely.
was 2015, 2016 for us.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do remember that first time I laid my eyes on a beautiful robotic arm. It was in college. It was a yellow Stoibli robot with a controller that was as big as my refrigerator. And
Mine was green.
And here I am working at a company where the controller box doesn't exist. It's inside the robot. But I mean, how technology has enabled that. And yeah, I do. And I remember seeing the robotic arm that you created. And I feel like it was just overnight, where I go into one of the laboratory automation events and it just seemed like a total pivot right away. I see, well, now Automata. So tell us a little bit about that pivot from developing a robotic arm and working in this collaborative robotic space to just going in and full on into laboratory automation.
Yeah. So first things first, I think any company that tells you a story that there was a straight path from where they started to where they ended up is probably like marketing their story, right? I think all companies have a non-linear trajectory to what they end up being. That's generally, at least when I talk to other founders, the ones that I feel have incredible trajectories. Although AI is kind of changing that. We're seeing incredible companies being built overnight, but that's a conversation for another. So we started, I think, like first-time founders fall in love with product, right? That's generally what first-time founders do. And we saw a very clear problem 6-7 months into founding Automata, which was we were visiting a ton of what are colloquially known as mom and pop manufacturers, right? Like 5 to 100 people shops manufacturing anything from die-cast metal parts to semiconductors to small laboratories. And we were just visiting a ton of these people. Like even I remember visiting the largest sandwich manufacturer in Europe, random things. And we were hearing the same thing all the time, which is we know we should be using robotics. It just feels too difficult and too expensive. And that was the kind of founding spark of the first part of Automata, which is like, okay, we're going to build a robot that anyone can buy on a credit card. So it had to be cheaper than $10,000. And we're going to build the software that allows you to program it in like hours, right? That was like all we cared about for 3 years, 2016 to 2019. That was Automata. And we did everything hardware companies do, right? Like if you Google early Automata stuff, what you'll find is patents in the gearbox space, right? We
Interesting. Okay.
innovated on, like, I've spent more hours than I'd admit thinking about gearbox bearings and gearbox lubrication and gear teeth profiles and going to manufacturing shops in China to figure out, can we manufacture this in high tolerance manufacturing environments, right? Because like our thesis was you had to build a robot the way you build a washing machine rather than the way you build a BMW to make it affordable, right? And therefore you had to use these kind of consumable technologies in manufacturing rather than the high-end stuff. And that was like an incredible journey. I remember the first robot that shipped from our Chinese partner in its box. And, you know, in 2019, we shipped 350 robots in our first like 10 to 12 months of the business. It was incredible.
Wow.
And I don't know if you know this word, like product market fit, right? It's like it's a mantra in startups that you have product market fit. And we thought we had it, right? Like I had a marketing email chain of 1,000 people. We sent out the email and the pre-orders came in and we shipped 300 robots, right? It was incredible at $10,000 a pop. And little did we know that we didn't have product market fit. And, you know, when we looked at our data, we saw it very clearly. Like there was just a ton of different types of people using our product. And we did not want to be an OEM. We didn't want to be an original equipment manufacturer. That's not why we started the business. I don't want a system integrator sitting between me and my customer. And all I did was ship them a box with my on it. And we quickly realized something, which was the road to adopting automation at scale has two challenges. One is the technology itself, which is what we had focused 3.5 years on. And the other thing was change management, right? Like you guys will know this better than anyone, right? Like you can't just give them a great robot and expect them to use it. You're going to have to hold their hand, show them how it scales in their organization. And that's the path to scale. And what taught us this is, you know, some of our accounts were really growing with us. And we're like, what's different than this account than this account? And all that was the difference was where our team leaned into the account because there was a proactive customer. We found scale, right? Like if you talk to me in 2019, my biggest customer was a provider to the Fiat Chrysler supply chain, right? There's Fiat Puntos out in the world that their car boot was built using EVAs.
Okay.
But we also saw a ton of interesting things happening in two other markets. One was e-commerce, micro-fulfillment, and the rest is history in that, right? COVID blew that industry up. To us, that was a machine vision problem, and I'm not a machine vision shop. And the other thing, we saw something really interesting in our lab automation partners, customers. And what we saw in 2019 as newbies to the industry was people were really exhausted of only depending on the liquid handler, right? They wanted to scale beyond it. And two, what I couldn't understand at the time, but I'm glad we were right, is increasingly these companies were choosing their automation partners on software capabilities, not hardware spec sheets. And for us, that was like, oh my God, because we were concerned if we became an OEM that the race to the bottom was unwinnable in robotics hardware, right? Especially with China coming online in cobots. And that's when we're like, okay, we're now a lab automation company. Like I've collapsed 9 months of my life into that story, but that basically is the gist of that pivot. And then COVID happens, right? And I think I've told the story so much time that COVID happens and one day the NHS calls us and they're like, hey, you guys make robots, right? The NHS is our local health service here in the UK. They run all the hospitals basically. And they're like, we need you to help us scale our PCR testing from 10,000 tests a day to 100,000 tests a day. And we're like, yeah, sure, we can do this. And while we're talking to them, we're literally Googling what is PCR testing. And
Hopefully they're not watching right now.
yeah, well, you know, we went from a company that sold robot arms for $10,000 a pop for that. Over the next 8 months, suddenly we won a $2 million contract in the NHS. And I know exactly why that happened, which is everyone else, due to their capabilities, proposed something that looked like a car factory to do it. I built a robot arm the size of my arm. I don't know how to design something like that. My team didn't know how to design something like that. But I had an incredible team at prototyping. And what they prototyped was something that looked like a vending machine, right? And the NHS would come see us every 2 weeks. And every time they came to see us, they saw a better prototype and a better prototype and a better prototype. And everyone else they were talking to would just show them a new PowerPoint, right? And they were like, I don't know. I want to take a bet on these people. And what we proposed is like, look, to hit your scale, we can't give you 2 massive machines, but we can give you 35 small ones.
Yep.
Right? And you can get the first one next month, and I'll just keep rolling them out to you. And if you think about what Link is today, and we'll get to that, you can probably see the roots of the decisions we've made in those kind of serendipitous decisions over COVID. So that is kind of like the gist of our pivot at the time. We could go into, I literally think the roots of Link were born there. I can talk about it. One was the modularity, and the other was we quickly realized that we can't run around with a flash drive in an infectious disease environment up in software.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it was like,
probably no.
that led to two really important decisions, which I still think live in Automata. One was the cloud is the way to go, right? Provision in the cloud, deploy once, scale many times, or write once, deploy many. And then the other one is a bit convoluted, but I think it's important, which is automation should not be Workcell centric. It should be workflow centric, right? Workflow should be the undivisible lowest common denominator of lab automation, not the work cell.
Yeah.
And that was a decision we made because of this project, because it's like, okay, we're going to change the prototype a lot. Our workflow schemas should survive that change. And, I think this is the benefit of naivety sometimes. You make decisions that at the time feel immediately obvious, but might not be immediately obvious in the long term, which is why I'm a big fan of naivety, right? Sometimes to the chagrin of my team. So that is the pivot of Automata into a lab automation business, at least the roots of the pivot.
That's a fantastic
That's so
turn,
cool.
turn of a business, because that work cell approach that you mentioned, it just seems so important today, post COVID. I mean, it's maybe COVID was the thing that stirred it up and said, okay, this is the direction we have to go. But yeah, I mean, the monolithic work cell has been kind of the dominant approach for a long time. Is having, a big project, takes years to get it on track. And now with the capability of the software, yes, you need to make adjustments to the hardware to adapt to different workflows. But now with, software, you can quickly adapt that. And if you create smaller work cells, it's a lot easier to bring something new together as opposed to starting yet another 1-year project to build something up. So I think that's a fantastic pivot story. And to have the NHS as participant in that and kind of driving that, because it was really, I remember the inquiries that were coming in around COVID. Do you have any used liquid handlers? Do you have any used robots? Do you have something? PCR machines? All of a sudden, Kingfishers became king. It was like all these
Yes.
things that you're like, that instrument I rarely hear about until now. and here we go.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. I think we're still living in the afterglow of those days in some ways, especially in the OEM markets. But yeah, it was, in a lot of ways, COVID was very hard. But I think for a lot of businesses, COVID was this incredible opportunity window where risk became a good word for everyone. And incredible things happen in environments like that.
And one of the bullet points on our our document was how Automata differs from traditional automation companies. But I think you've highlighted that perfectly in really the pivot. But is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think we're we know we're the kind of newcomers into a space that's a couple of decades old at least. And we try to walk that line with a lot of respect for the incumbents, because in a lot of ways we are building on top of what they've built for us, right? They fought a lot of the early fights to get this stuff into pharma and CROs and diagnostics organizations, and that spark we saw in 2019 was probably due to them. But I think the way I think about how we build Automata is, I have this first principle I try to live by. Like, we're not smarter than anyone. We are just a product of our time. And that's how I think about Automata, right? I'm born cloud native. I'm born digital first. I'm born optimization first. I'm born machine learning first. I'm born modern hardware principles first. I'm born kind of low code, no code first. I'm born SDK first, right? And these are the opportunities that are afforded to Automata because it was born in 2020. And I think the other thing is we have a lot of, we try to keep our ear to the ground really closely to the automation scientist community and understand what's going on in those 20 and 30-year-olds, to be honest, who are going to be the future of this industry. And, what I see there is like your average automation scientist is more comfortable in a Python notebook than they are with a pipette. And, that is who we're building Automata for. And I think that's, whether that differentiates us or not is not my main concern. That is what we try to live by as a product organization.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was really intrigued by your, it was relatively recent. I guess it was maybe a little over a month ago. You did a live production. I'm always impressed when somebody goes live.
Yeah. Put our what is it? Put our product where our mouth is.
Yeah. And talking about the software, that's another area. It's like if you have let's say a demo that's in a loop or something like that, and you've got it in the background of video, but you're doing a live software demo. And I was really impressed with that and talking about your cloud architecture. And I'm totally with you when it comes to a lot of the future problem solving needs to happen in the software side of things, right? In terms of to optimize. And I was going to ask, what gaps are you kind of in the near term addressing in terms of, helping customers develop workflows or automating workflows? Because I know that's always the biggest challenge is taking something that they did on the bench or even a concept and bringing it into automation. What areas are you addressing with your software and hardware approach for that matter? But I would imagine a lot of it's around software for bringing people into the automation field.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the hardware side of things, our whole philosophy is around modularity and the building brick of the link bench. And I think we hadn't fully appreciated how strong that is for us until this year, which is like we can mock together any system within hours, right? Like my in-house team, I saw this recently, a client pivot on a dime on something they wanted, and the team redesigned the thing from scratch in over a lunch period. It was incredible. And I think that is what's possible with these building blocks that are the link bench. And however, like you're saying, I think especially from a usability perspective, because like we said in that launch, lab automation is such an incredible technology, but such a frustrating technology in the same time, which is, I think, in the software experience. And there we're trying to obviously encourage people to be able to program their own automation, because we gave a talk two years ago when we were starting the Link software endeavor, and we're like, imagine a world where every copy of Excel came with a customer success engineer, right? That would be a horrible world, wouldn't it? And that is lab automation today, don't you think? Like, we ship people these $1 million devices, and they can
here you go.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, you can do 30% of what you want to do on it, but the other 70%, give me a call. And that's not a tool, that's a service. And we really believe the future of this technology has to be a tool. If we're gonna, in the end of the day, we're at the service of people doing the actual smart stuff, right? The scientists. So we need to give them tools. So that's what we invest in software. And I think it comes down to a few things. One is obviously the kind of protocol translation problem. And we understand that 70%, 60% of our users are going to want the kind of no-code, low-code approach to programming automation, which is why we're heavily invested in our product called Canvas, which is a paradigm a lot of people have. But I think there's still a ton of gains to be made in UX to simplify that world. I think the name of the game there is abstraction and augmentation, right? How do you abstract away everything from the device to, you basically abstract down to up to the level of an action that a scientist speaks on a day-to-day basis. So converting their SOP into a Canvas workflow should be a snap finger. And then we're investing a lot in augmentation. You're going to see this coming out from us a lot this year, right? That's another thing we're going to stick to. You're going to see new software from Automata on a quarterly basis for the coming decade, I think. And basically augmentation, these things are smart enough now that they should be helping you as you're building your workflow, telling you what to do next. Hey, I think you're going to have a problem here, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So abstraction and augmentation, I think, is the pathway to massively improving, converting your SOP into an automation protocol. And then the other side we're massively investing in is what we clumsily call our power users. And these are the people who are like SLAS was really interesting because our SDK took up most of our time at the booth, which was really surprising to me.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
my team was doing an hour and a half demos sometimes with people. It was crazy, like 60, 90-minute demos. And I think people would just be like, oh my God, show me. And, there for us, it's like, what's powerful about an SDK is increasingly these people understand, these automation scientists understand that this should be APIs talking to APIs. And two, that I need an API or an SDK in which I can actually create my workflow protocols, not just parametricize them. So I can walk in my data schemas, I can think of these things as ontologies in my code. And that is what makes them scalable. And then all the good practice of good structured code as well. And that's a big, big investment for us. And then the third thing feels more operational, which is just the correct, in our opinion, scalable edge and cloud architecture for the lab, right? And, we have 6 to 7 hardware engineers on Automata and 50 software engineers on Automata. I would say a fourth of that software workforce is invested in platform, which is, our internal language for on-prem, edge, and cloud interaction and the software products we're building there. And that's where we pull in our partners like AWS and others, because that to me is such an obvious Achilles heel. And we're already deploying systems in global pharma with their own tendencies that sit across geographies, but there's so many more gains to make here, especially as you understand that in a lot of these companies, automation is just a proxy to data production. But we can talk about that, right? So those are the three big investment areas for the next year and a half for Automata. We have a lot more things we can talk about because, we have a fundamental belief that we also have the mandate to grow horizontally in our product footprint. But we can talk about that later.
And so I think I totally get what you're saying about workflow is one of the biggest roadblocks to a customer adopting automation. Like the ability to take workflow and translate it into automation, whatever methodology you're using. It's, you're having to pull together a lot of pieces, many of which, as you said, can be somewhat it can be an augmented experience, augmented user experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that, I have to deal with the raw instrument software for every single thing, which brings me to another thing in all my years of laboratory automation and looking at it from the robotics perspective. So, I try to look at it from the scientific side when I talk with instrumentation companies. In fact, I had a great opportunity. The company, I can't remember their name, but the company that won the product award at SLAS 2025, it was a thermocycler. And my first thing I told the gentleman was, this thing is like, as far as thermocyclers go, it is so automation friendly. You've got a nice nest. It's repeatable. It shows up. This is what robots love. And that's my angle on kind of everything. And so interoperability is kind of where I wanted to go to is how do you see kind of managing interoperability? Because I feel like, there's a lot of folks with stakes and, a stake in the ground saying, look, this is our space. This is our world. Here's here's some hooks you can talk with our instrument and our device and our software. But there's a lot of innovation, I feel like, that can happen there. Same thing in robotics. We've seen, we try to adapt to the market's need as far as robotics. But in terms of instrumentation, do you see some opportunities for interoperability and bringing things together into your work environment, which really, from what you said, I can totally get you're driving towards better user experience, better, faster user adoption, or faster adoption within the pharma research space. And how do you see interoperability playing into that?
Yeah, interoperability is a really tough problem, right? And if I go back to the pre-lab automation automata, right? So, if you look at our cap table, hopefully you don't care about these things. ABB is on there, right? So ABB was actually my second investor back in 2016, and I spent a lot of time with the leadership team there on this topic in industrial robotics. And even in industrial robotics, there's a massive failure of interoperability. And if you think about it, these companies are behemoths, right? ABB, KUKA,
Sure.
Staubli, compared to the big companies of our space, Bar, Thermo Fisher, and Danaher. And they couldn't agree to get interoperability in place, right? And you have few sectors of that market where interoperability worked. For example, plastics injection molding has a protocol that everyone is forced to use. But interestingly, the end user forced the protocol on the OEMs.
Yes.
Never get to agree. So I think there's a clue there, right? Plastic injection molding is a massive industry that has some huge players in it. Does that remind you of someone? It should.
Oh yeah.
It's called pharma. The end user forced the protocol on the OEMs because the OEMs have too many vested interests to agree interoperability, in my opinion. However, I think someone has to come in and be a force for that. We're massive fans of interoperability. We're massive fans of open source, right? And my marketing team will not want me talking about some stuff, so I won't. But later in the year, you'll see a lot from Automata on those words. We're big believers in that, and we want to put our money where our mouth is on that stuff. And, you have to start to etch there. I think you also have to collaborate with the big players, right? And you have great incentive for them. And I think what we're seeing is the OEMs see the benefit of having their devices be automation friendly. We do a lot of sales for all the big liquid handler guys. They do a lot for us. And it's just a very, very positive cycle between us right now. And at the end of the day, the benefit is to the end user. And so, we could all just continue to throw FTEs at driver teams. I don't think that should be what the future looks like, right? And, when I think about something as esoteric as error handling, interoperability is the problem, right?
Yes.
Jeff probably has a ton of ideas about what good error handling paradigms should look like in the lab. And the problem is, how these devices talk to each other, how they surface this information. And, companies like ours have to spend countless man hours working around these walled gardens to make that functionality possible for our end user. So the short answer to your question is, the way I currently think about it is I throw my resources at it. The more polite way is we lean very hard into that to improve our customer experience. I think Automata will start to take an initiative approach to this problem, which is look, we're not going to wait for others to start. We're going to start, and we'll take the risk, and we might get slapped down a bit, but we'll take the risk on that, and you'll see some stuff later this year. And then 3, we're willing to collaborate and, be a partner or be at service or be, we just want to play whatever role to push interoperability. I think our end users have a role to play as well, which is demand it, right? And maybe propose it. And I think Sila is a good step, but in my experience, in traditional automation, those initiatives haven't taken off. We had equivalents to those in industrial automation, and they never took off. It's too many vested interests where those things
sort of the walled garden effect, where everybody's got their garden. I was curious, Jeff and Elizabeth, what are your thoughts on some of that? You see that with trying to interconnect disparate devices or disparate architectures, and the customer's like, I just want it all to work, right? I mean, it's an innocent request from the customer. I just want it all to work together, and play nice. But what are your thoughts on that, Jeff, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll go. Kind of hearkening back to the earlier part of the conversation is, we all just want plug and play.
Yes.
We can plug anything, our phone, into our computer. It says, oh, I know whose phone that is, and I know who your contacts are.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're looking for. That's what we kind of in the industry are like, why can't it be plug and play?
Yes.
It has to be, because when you start to deploy these systems, it should be like this and not a matter of weeks, months, years in some cases.
Yes.
So yeah, I would love to see that come together. I'm thinking Mostafa's raised his hand to lead the coalition to get everybody together. And
If you complain, you're basically volunteering.
yeah,
Yeah. We're happy to volunteer. I wouldn't say lead, but we're happy to volunteer and push. But yeah, I completely agree. Plug and play is what this should feel like.
yeah,
I-
yeah. And I mean, having spent a lot of time in the labs from an embedded engineering team, yeah, things just have to work. When you're on a call with somebody who's trying to connect a Lyconic, and there's a problem there because there's a bit of information that they don't have that you do, that you didn't know they don't have. You
Yes.
find out they don't have it, how you give it to them, and now it's like, oh, now it works.
Yes.
It's like lack of information, first of all, and easy connectivity. And again, I feel like with not a knock against Sila, but it's like you guys are trying to recreate the wheel.
Yes.
Start doing this.
Yes.
That's what drives me crap crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. I when I first got back into the industry, because I had a hiatus working for a surgical robot company, but getting back into it in 2014, Sila was just coming online, and it's like, hey, do you have a Sila driver for a robot? And I'm thinking, I looked at it, I'm like, Sila's not really built out for robots. Robots are really fully embedded into a piece of software. Once you put a robot in there, you can talk to it using a standardized interface, but in the end, you want to get the best performance out of that robot that you can possibly get. And if you're working through a channel like that, sometimes it's not the best, but if you're, for data interconnection and standardized connecting of devices, I get it. And I'm glad to see a lot of companies, like you were saying, Mostafa, the customer needs to get involved. And I'm hearing from customers, they are driving to say, hey, everything on this box, maybe except the robot, but everything that is delivered needs to be connected via Sila. Maybe 90% of it happens, but that's better than the 10%, 10 years ago that you would get as a result of that. And so it's nice to see it driving in that direction. But automotive has had standards in place for so many years, going back to the 80s.
Who drove that?
Customers. I mean, they had
Exactly.
to. They couldn't afford to bring in all this equipment required for an automotive plant without some level of standardization. Otherwise, they'd have 10,000 specialists just to build a factory,
Yeah.
and it would never work together.
But it sounds like Mostafa is saying, they need to drive it again in this instance.
Yeah, I think so. And like just a couple of side notes. One is, can we please take VWorks behind the shed and end its misery? That's one. And two is, I was just at the JP Morgan conference and spent a lot of time with like leadership of some of the big conglomerates in our space from the OEM side, not the pharma side, although they were there as well, of course. I was impressed by that leadership. Very, very attuned to what's happening on the ground. And I think directionally very aligned, right? So I actually don't think there's friction there at all. And, there's this famous saying that only the paranoid survive, that truism in business speak. And I found that leadership to be quite paranoid. Like they know if they sit on their hands on a few things, on the trends in the market, they're going to miss a boat here. And that's not usually what you find in the conglomerate incumbents. So that was really good to see.
Yeah, that is great. That's very inspiring. I saw some posts from folks about the JP Morgan conference, and sounded like it was a good conference altogether. But great to hear that feedback as well. So, kind of driving a little more into the future. and switching gears into AI. I'm hearing about it more and more. Oh,
Here we go.
it
It always comes up.
It's a topic. Yeah, it's a
Has
topic
to
that
come
has
up.
never made it out of an episode.
But Mostafa
Of
mentioned it
Helical Brew. Yeah,
in
but
the
no,
beginning.
but
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
It clearly has a role, especially since we're talking about the data generators, right? These automation tools, as you and I like how you approached it as a tool, are data generators, so you can make decisions and drive your research forward. I'm hearing more and more about, very specific ways, that AI can be used. And most of it's, interpreting image data or interpreting data, maybe it's not image data, but just data in general, and sort of a big data tool to do analysis. But how do you see it from an automation provider perspective, and how you're going to continue to develop your hardware and software?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it sounds like you're the AI advocate in the group, Mike. So, um,
It's hit and miss.
We all equally bring it up.
We try to be
you'd,
agnostic.
Make him bring it up first.
you'd fit in really well in my product team, Mike. So yeah, the question is look, I won't pretend to understand all the benefits of AI and the recent AI innovations in drug discovery. Again, all the way back to minute one of this podcast, I'm not a life science background or scientist, so I know you've had guests on this podcast who could speak a lot more eloquently than that, but I've also, in the venture capital companies that have invested in Automata, I spend a lot of time with other founders in that space, and they're doing incredible things, whether they're building the foundational models for for things like protein design, whether they're building biotechs that their whole thesis is of leveraging these technologies for certain therapies or modalities. And, so I'm operating from a place that, first of all, this is not hype. We are at a kind of transformational decade in how we discover drugs. And I think we kind of try to operate an Automata that's incredibly exciting to have been building a lab automation company at that point in time. So that's one. Two is, my mom is a doctor, so I thought the life sciences was like medicine, which is like biology in, biology out. And I was surprised to find out that it was actually biology and information out, right? That was such a mental, pivot for me, which is oh, this all makes sense now, right? Even something as dumb as a COVID test, right? It's saliva and it's a 1 or 0 out. Do you have COVID or you don't have COVID? And, in a very abstract way, that is what discovering a drug is as well, right? You're throwing a bunch of things at each other and you're hoping to see a pattern. And, so yeah, we are big believers in the idea that apart from diagnostics, because we do some work in that space with folks like the NHS and others on, things like oncology, but in our pharma customers, in our biotech customers, automation is a proxy to data production. And it's a proxy to data production in a scalable and repeatable way. I'm not saying anything novel here. And I think we're seeing our customers demand more of what automation can do to assist that workflow. And, I think, again, I'm not going to be saying anything novel in the demands of things like lab in the loop or closed loop automation or whatever you call that, which is one workflow's results parametricizing the results of the next workflow. I think that's just scratching the surface of what's possible. And that's why deep down as a product strategy, we really believe in APIs talking to APIs, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what it should feel like. And we have a couple of customers, Sura knows one of them, whose whole mission statement pivots around that idea. And these customers are taking an incredible amount of Workcells and are fully focused on this idea of APIs talking to APIs so that intelligence can talk to automation and vice versa and back and forward. And we're hearing the same request in Series A biotechs who have incredible vision. And when I talk to an SVP of research technologies in, the top 3 pharma in the world, they're asking for the same thing. And I think if you just think about it, because again, you've had folks like Will come here to talk from Ginkgo, and I think he can talk more eloquently than I can on implementation. But the way I see it is, if you just think from like first principles and look at other industries and what happened to them in these moments, is data tool chains are built. Right?
Yep.
Like that is what happens. And there's nothing unique about the life sciences that say that's not what's going to happen here. Right? And I think long term, I wouldn't even call it long term anymore. I would say medium term. I think that's what's going to happen to automation here, is that automation, the only difference between us and the other data tool chains that are built in other industries is there's a wet lab, which is messy and hard. In the life sciences, I'm not a big believer that the life sciences is an industry that's going to benefit from synthetic data, right? There's not going to be a scale AI in our industry. So therefore, the wet lab is going to matter for the next decade or so. And therefore, the wet lab will be the only place that you can produce incredibly large amounts of data for the stuff that these companies are betting on. And therefore, automation companies will either become, and automation will either become a small cog in a large machine. But I fundamentally believe automation and automation companies are the right place, the right wedge to build the entire tool chain, right? Because we're doing the hard stuff. We're producing the petabytes of data a week in some of our customers on our platform. It gives us, one of my investors uses a word I really like. It gives us the jurisdiction to innovate around that data, right? Whether that's going to the left, that's how I think of it. Smarter people will call that downstream or upstream. I think of it going to the left of our data stack and innovating on protocol generation and data schema structuring. Whether you want to call that the kind of, there's a lot of companies who do great work in this space, and all the way out to things like, even these days we see a lot of these NLP tools, right? And I think that is the direction we'll take things. But our design of experiment, right, is the thing a lot of people have been trying for a while here. I think that's going to evolve and will mature. And that's, to me, going to the left, and then going to the right, all the way over to data orchestration and pipelining and structuring that data and building robust data catalogs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That should be the jurisdiction of automation vendors. And more importantly than a vendor, an automation product platform, which is from protocol generation to data orchestration. There should be a single through line, and that through line should be your workflow data structures, which is how the bioinformatician on the other side, leveraging the data you've just produced, can cut it up in a meaningful way, query it in a meaningful way, see meaningful patterns in it. And when we talk to data teams in pharma, which we do all the time now, this is what we're hearing. I cannot speak to the wet lab. We don't speak the same language, right? And what they're talking about is their data frames are different. They don't query each other's data frames. And this is a very solvable problem. It's a jurisdiction problem. It's a product innovation problem. And to me, there's a straight line from where we are. It's a hop, skip, and a step to that. And I don't know if I answered your question, but this is what Automata's vision is medium term.
Definitely. I mean, I feel like you've really listened to your customers and prospective customers, right? You really listened a lot, because that concept of providing a shorter path, or less of a steep barrier to be able to get past a lot of these little things. They add up as you're creating a workflow. Each individual, and they're very departmental sometimes. There's imaging, biology, and you've got the pipetting expertise within the under the roof, if you will, and then you've got all these different areas of expertise. But it's really hard to bring together. And it's a hard problem to solve, and a lot of it's software. We talked about that. Yes. The interoperability and connectivity, but it's also just how you approach. When I started in this business in the early 2000s, it was all or nothing. It was 3 gigantic robots in a room, or
Yes.
it was a little benchtop Hudson plate crane of some
Oh
sort.
yeah, yeah.
or the S Lab or one of those things, right? A reader feeder kind of thing. But it was a room filling NIH 4 robot system that cost $25 million.
Yeah,
It was just
I've seen one of those.
one
yeah.
or the other, and the number of people required to keep that big machine running is like Army is maintaining a 747, basically. And so I feel like you've touched on it, all those key things that help bring people in. In other words, they don't think of each individual component as big of a problem as it was 10 years ago to bring in, and it can even get easier as we go forward. So no, I think it definitely captures the question, and but in terms of like 5-10 years down the road, where do you see Automata going? Or are you just kind of concentrating on the near term currently, and not so much the long haul vision?
No, I think we execute in the near term. We think in the long term, if that makes sense. And we definitely think about what does the world look like in 5-10 years, and we have different visions. I have an incredible team around me. So I have people like my global head of pre-sales who's been in the industry for a really long time, and I use his voice in my thinking on I can get pretty excited about trends, right? Like a lot of, he'd be like, hold your horses, right? Like we've been here before in the life sciences, and some of these pan out, but generally we agree on the direction of travel. So what am I trying to say? Yeah, we're really excited about that 5-10 year picture. I think things like there's clear trends in my mind. I'm a big fan of miniaturization. As a newcomer, I have the right to be excited about that. Someone like Jeff might be a lot more cynical about miniaturization. I would like to think there's a world in 10 years where what happens in like a 10 Workcell lab, which should happen on a tabletop, right? And, what is lab automation when that world comes to bear is something we think a lot about sometimes. Two, Sura will know this, like simulation will get better, right? And what happens in vitro and what happens in silico will completely reverse, right? Like, we talk a lot about this internally in our product team sometimes, which is like, today, if you run 1 million in vitro loops for every 1,000 in silico loops, the future should be you run 1 million in silico loop for every 1 in vitro loop, right? And therefore, in vitro, the role of what happens in vitro is fundamentally different than what should happen in silico. And experimentation, that word should be primarily the domain of in silico. And what is lab automation in that world? And again, I fundamentally believe the thing that won't change, even if, what happens in 50 rooms happens in 1 room down the line because of miniaturization, or that we can accurately model proteins or cells or these interactions at a humongous scale, and the level of compute we have is incredible, and the level of intelligence we have is terrifying. What still is maintained, if we are still in a space where we are discovering drugs and new modalities to deliver them, is there will need to be a through line between the world of in vitro and the world of in silico. And that through line will need to be structured, easy to query. It'll be something along the flow of data. And, therefore, we think of ourselves as on that march long term. That the easiest, most pithy way to explain that's why I have 50 people in software and 5 on hardware. And that's just the start.
Sure.
And, that I think that's how we think about it. Like this industry is hopefully on now an inflection point of transformation. And I know it's easy to say, I had a conversation with someone recently. I don't know if he put it perfectly, which he was like, look, I did my PhD like 25, 30 years ago, and I recently visited my alma mater. And the only goddamn thing that changed in the whole building was the sequencing lab. Right?
And that is academia in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, but it's the state of technology as well. Like there was something fundamental that happened in sequencing, and a revolution happened around that. And I thought we were done, but like Roche just like shook the whole thing, and
I yeah.
Yep.
and that got adopted. And I think that's gonna. I hope this is what AI drug discovery, the prevalence of data, the need for experimentation at scale will do to automation. And we're just really excited to be on the ride. We have the ambition to lead the ride. And so, yeah, like without divulging too much, like, yeah, we absolutely think in the long term and execute in the near term. And that's why, step one is robust, easy to use software. Step two is robust, easy to use, more abstracted software with more power tooling for the power users. And then we're going to go horizontally from there in our product domain. And then you're going to start to build synergies between your products and then build in your ecosystem of partners. I think that's how incredible companies get built. And at the end of the day, incredible companies are at the service of their end users. And that's how we think about it at the moment.
I'm gonna coin a phrase that just keeps running in my mind right now. We've all heard the term tech debt comes
Yes.
from the software side. But I think what you're mentioning when you go left to right, you're solving workflow debt, which is
Yes.
huge right now.
Yes.
So I think once you get into that linear path, I'm solving all this debt in between.
Yes.
Interoperability, data formatting, intelligence, all that stuff. So solving workflow debt. You're welcome to
It's a
use
good
that.
analogy.
I'm taking that one for sure, Jeff.
I love that he's allowing you to use it.
And like I think a big blocker again, if we go all the way back to the beginning of the session, at change management is one of the things as a community we're going to have to get over is I am unique. And what do I mean by that is like your science is unique, your processes aren't, right?
And amen. Testify.
You can't tell them that though; they'll get upset.
Cell culture is particularly
You're
particular.
like, sure, but
Yeah, we say it with love, right? Like
Yeah.
your science is unique, and in the end of the day, that's where you should pay attention, right? Like, I tried to build a robot arm at one point. We built a robot arm. Like, imagine how much slower I would have been as a company if I had to figure out, firmware provisioning, and I had to figure out EtherCAT protocols, and the tools exist for a reason, and
Yeah.
the tool force you into a
100%.
way of working and a scalable paradigm. And I don't think that's taken hold yet in the burgeoning industry that is lab automation and the end users.
agree.
Do you see, Mostafa, any areas, or again, you don't have to divulge what you don't want to divulge, but do you see Automata going into areas, let's say instrumentation? We've seen this in the past, with companies that say, you know what, here's a problem we can solve really, really well and create a new device. Do you ever see Automata entering that space? Or
My honest answer now is no.
okay.
I think there's better people who can do that with different business models. For us to A, I don't have the skill set in house to do that. B, that's a product development cycle I don't know if we can support, right? It takes years to bring something like that
Yep.
to market, and that's what the market deserves. C, yeah, like I think that's a tough business model, right?
Yeah, no, I completely understand.
C is CA.
And with that, also, like, I think, what about the mobile robots as well? What are your thoughts on that?
So technologically, I love them. I don't understand the value proposition. I've spoken to, hopefully you're getting the sense that I spend a lot of time with our users, and I just don't get the value prop. Is it highly customized, low volume use cases? Is it, I think there's more elegant solutions to inter-workcell connectivity. I just, yeah, I just do not understand the value proposition of mobile robots. So therefore, Automata is making zero investment. I can say that with confidence in that space at the moment. We think things like inter-workcell operability is very important. I could potentially see the world of automating unconnected devices. But that feels to me like a niche use case, right? And so yeah, therefore, we're not. It's not a space we're interested in at Automata at the moment. With the honest answer.
It's interesting. It follows along with what we talked about before, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't been on the vendor side very long. I'm usually embedded with scientists and biotech companies and biopharma. So it's really nice to hear about how you're thinking about solutions for people, because I think we've experienced that with low volume automation teams, and then we get a product that we think is going to work another way, and it's largely unsupported, and we kind of have to figure it out on our own. So that's great that Automata thinks already about that.
Yeah, I think it's what you have to do if you have two things in mind. One is exactly what you're saying, is like we are a tool, and therefore we have the responsibilities of being a good tool. And then on the founder's side, you're like, I'm a product company, and I have to remember that. And I think more of us should remember that. Like, I'm a product company. What is the mandate of product companies? Your mandate is to scale through your product.
100%.
You should be putting 99, that's an exaggeration, like 50, 60% of every dollar you spend should be going into product innovation. And, that's the fight we fight every day at Automata, because it's hard to do that. And, that's why we lean on things like venture capital and things like that. But that's how we're building Automata as well.
Nice.
Yeah, it's really, I completely get that. In the product management and also business development side of your company has to kind of put in those qualifiers of, is this a technology we really want to chase and integrate into our product and spend the R&D dollars and the R&D time to do it? Or is it just not a good time for that right now? And that I think is such an important thing, because there's a lot of distractions possible in this space, right? There's a lot of between, individual user approaches to things, and also just the range of instruments that are possible. If you can, there's nothing wrong with being confident and confidently guide into the solution that's going to be the most reliable and most effective coming from your company. And that's, there's nothing wrong with that. And there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. And instead of chasing the I don't know technology, not sure if it's going to work.
The next big thing,
you don't want to be doing R&D and customer projects at the same time, but so often that happens. I mean, yes, if you need to add a feature or something like that, that's different. But it's more, when you're adopting an entire, different approach just because somebody asked for it, that's never a good idea.
I completely agree. And also because the other one, which we tend to lean on more at Automata, is there's better folks out there suited to do this. And, the common startup-ism is buy versus build, right? And I'm not just saying this because of where you work, Mike, but we went from a company that our heart and soul was manufacturing robots to a company that started buying Precises. And you better believe that was a tough decision.
I bet it was.
A knock on the pride, maybe?
There was a year-long research effort. We could have pulled the trigger to start manufacturing that thing, which would have built a Scara. And we had our patents ready, we had the designs ready, we had our suppliers ready, and we pulled it because it's like, this is not what we do best. And what the others do is pretty great. And there's no reason to innovate here. And, sometimes you have to think of my job, my leadership team's job in the stage of the business we're in, and I hopefully think forever, is you are the protector of your product velocity. And product velocity is so important in a business, right? I think it's the number one metric of a business, to be honest. Above everything is especially in technology companies, is how fast do you develop product? And focus is the kind of lifeblood of product velocity. So yeah, that was a hard lesson to learn. You learn it a lot doing a pivot, because a pivot forces you to stare in the mirror and be like, what did I get wrong in my product decisions? And then if you come out of that on the other side, which we have, hopefully, your product antenna is finely tuned and it just keeps getting more tuned. So yeah, product velocity is all that matters. Focus is the lifeblood to product velocity. Therefore, we don't think of those things as distractions. We just think like there's someone better to do that. Let's just leverage them.
Right on. Right on. Any final? We're coming up on 1 hour. We can go a little bit more if you want. But any final takeaways or from our other hosts? Any things you wanted to bring up?
Did we warn him about pick of the week?
We didn't warn him
Did you
about
put it on the list?
Tell him about it, Mike. Maybe he's got something handy.
All right, so we have been doing this pick of the week, and very often it's a surprise to our guests.
So we do it every week.
We didn't change our format.
All right, fine. It's every week. It's a surprise, but the pick of the week is just something that whether it's a technology, a piece of software, a physical product, what have you, or a book or an audio book that has inspired you or you've really enjoyed, and that's our pick of the week.
If you need a minute, we can make Mike and Jeff go first. They always have something.
Yeah, you guys should definitely go first. Like this is like.
Or do you want me to go first? I've got something cool.
Okay, go for it.
So my pick of the week are these new custom Helical Brew hats.
Booyah!
Swag.
Wow,
Beanies
for the
coming
first
soon.
time.
Maybe we'll get into a.
Is it a
mode
trucker?
where we can
Is it a
match our
trucker
guests.
You're the
hat?
trucker. Yeah.
All right. Wow, we've gone
We're-
swag. Helical Brew
we
has
got
gone
swag,
swag. All right. That'll be part of our guest package now. You're the
Yeah,
episode
little
20.
coat.
Mustafa's our first episode with the new Helical Brew hat.
Like,
Right on.
Yeah. Pick of the week. Yeah, I have a few, I guess. Like one to start on the simple side in terms of what I've read recently that have really helped me think about things is this book called The Messy Middle. Big fan. You can get it on Amazon. It's quite an easy read. It's a founder story by the founder of a large company we've all heard of. You can go find the book. And, he talks about the cover of the book is literally a line and then it gets really squiggly and then the line again. And it's like building companies is nonlinear, just to go all the way back to the beginning of the conversation and actually enjoy being in the messy middle. There's a lot to learn and all companies have a messy middle. So for anyone in your listeners who is thinking about building a company, it's a lot of us are encouraged to read things like From Zero to One, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. But I also think like The Messy Middle is a great book too. From the technology side of our industry, I've been spending some time checking out what Roche has been doing. It's really impressive. For the sequencing market, which is a market that's been rocked by innovation recently. So I don't understand the technology fundamentally, but I just watch with fascination how a company like Roche can still innovate and still disrupt and still come out of nowhere seemingly.
Yes, very much out of nowhere.
We talked about that a little last episode.
Stock
but
market.
yeah, it
When the
was-
stock market shows it came out of nowhere, it did come out of nowhere.
Yeah. So that was incredible to watch. And then a product I've been playing with a lot recently is probably deep research. From folks like OpenAI. I don't know if any of you are paying that extortionate $200 for that pro life.
I don't think anyone on this podcast.
Sounds like somebody
I
else
don't get
has a
paid
good
enough.
model there, Mustafa.
But that thing is like 2 or 3 years away from doing my job.
What is it called? Deep search?
Deep research. It's just like you
Deep
can
research.
ask. It's like it's the reasoning models. So you can ask.
Introducing deep research. Yep.
You can ask it pretty hard questions. Leave it running for like 18 minutes, which is a lifetime in LLMs. And as long as you know how to structure your prompt, I've been playing a lot with like 2 or 3 paragraph long prompts. You get some like you get like 18, 25 page PDF answers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
For the $200 a month, yes, you do.
Yeah, that's solid.
Worth it.
Yeah. Like you can ask it something as, tactical as like, what's your opinion of Thermo Fisher's earnings?
I would love to hear that.
Mike.
break those down for me.
Celebration and disappointment all in the same sentence.
Yeah.
I think the author wrote a book. It was the worst of times. It was the best of times.
Yeah,
right?
a lot of things could apply to that. I read the stock ticker. I'm like, is it good or is it bad? I can't tell.
Yeah. Or, Mike, you can ask it, like, what do you think artificial intelligence will do to lab automation? I can ask it that for you and send you the PDF.
Okay.
Then we'll have to host it as a guest.
Now we can do a poll on how many pages will that PDF be?
But if it comes back and says, if I told you I'd have to kill you, we got a problem.
Oh, no. I don't want that AI.
But we'll link everything that Mostafa just said in the description so you can go and check out the book and check out everything else he mentioned.
Jeff, you got one?
I do.
Maybe, yeah, just a shout out to someone I know who's building cool product in the space, a very early stage. So I remember being a super, super early stage founder. I would have liked this as well. Like,
Shout out.
I've been playing in the last 2 months with what Nick is building at Potato. I don't know if you guys know him. Pretty cool. Yeah, like check it out. It's this idea of like an AI scientist, and
I'm looking it up right now.
yeah.
Well, I'll go.
Potato IA scientist.
Yeah.
Go, Jeff.
Silence. I had this last
AI, I
week,
think.
but
So
we ran out of time.
a shout out to an early stage product.
Yeah, that's
Very
cool.
cool.
I'll check that one out.
So I had this last week. Didn't show it because I already had something. But Mostafa, you kind of sparked, and it just dovetails into this book. I don't know if you're a fan of Simon. I don't know if you've read this, but this book talks about how corporations think of themselves in a game. And it's a finite game. And that's how they play. Leadership plays a finite game. Did we win this quarter? Well, okay, yeah, you're number one, but the game's not over. You're still playing the game. It's not like a sporting event where two participants get on the field and then the outcome, the game is over, but there's a winner. That's not how you win in business. It's like, I can't play just this moment in time. Like you said, we develop at the near term, but I'm thinking way down the road type of thing. So it's kind of that infinite mindset game you're thinking of. I'm glad I brought this because I wasn't sure, but you really dovetailed into that book nicely. Good job.
Nice. Yeah.
I infected you all with my books.
Yeah,
So
because
just
at
to
first
get
it
it-
was all products.
Just to get it correct, the website is readysetpotato.com and it's Nick Edwards, right, Mostafa?
Yes.
Okay.
Ready, set, potato.
I'll
Okay.
link that in the
I'm not
description
sure if
as
that's
well.
the website, but it's
It's AI research assistant for biology.
yes.
How cool is
Very
that?
cool.
That's the
Very nice.
well.
Now I have all these books to read.
My pick of the week, if you're an iPhone user or any Apple product user, you can use all you want or not, right? It actually has a switch in the settings, and my pick of the week, because I've had 2 months to use it, and I have to say, it's saved me a lot of time. I've owned my own domain, Ouren.net, for over 20 years. So when you have an email address for 20 years, and I try to put all the spam things, and it's been used to, online shopping and all that. It's just like the Apple Intelligence, I have to say, after 2 months, from a consolidated email where you can say, give me the priorities, and I don't even have to instruct it about anything. I have yet to miss an important email with that turned on, and I have yet to feel bad going back into the whole list to say, oh, it didn't forward that over. It hasn't happened. Those all end up getting archived anyway. So just from a time sync standpoint, and Apple Intelligence, all it's doing is running on your phone using your swipes and which emails you're keeping, which ones you're not, and the ones you're reading the most. It's just using that data. Very simple thing for localized, sorting, but that's my pick of the week. It's saved a lot of time on inbox management, including work email. It doesn't really matter. Anything that's in the Apple mailbox, it just sorts it. And I know there's other things it's doing, like it'll paraphrase a text message for you in 2 lines if you want, or a string of text messages, things like that.
Say again what it is.
Just Apple Intelligence. It's the
Apple Intelligence.
If you
Built
open
into
up your
phone, yeah.
settings on any
Got it.
Apple product with A17 Pro or later, or any M processor, you will see an Apple Intelligence and Siri switch inside your settings. I think if anyone who's upgraded, the software is basically knocking at the door saying, "Hey, Apple Intelligence is here. Turn it on if you want." Yes. And you know, I know some people are probably just disregarding it, but
I'll check it out.
That's
4 out of 5 picks of the week, Elizabeth.
Well, I don't have a pick of the week,
No
but
pressure.
I think like one thing that highlighted from the conversation is I think overall I've been, following the company, and it really is impressive the culture that you have within your team. And you mentioned within the conversation that you have an amazing team, and I feel like as a business owner, as a leader, it's the most important thing to recognize the work that our team does for us, because technically they're guiding the company and leading the company, but the team is what builds the entire, the culture, and what the customer receives is because what the team is doing inside internally, and all the, the vision of the company, putting together, that 5-year, 10-year vision, where you want to get, and leading them towards that, aligning them with your goals. So I have to say kudos to you for that. And you mentioned that during the conversation. So as a business owner, and I understand, the challenges, like you say, running a business is not a linear thing. It's just a lot of decisions that have to be made during the overall timeline. And you rely on, your leadership team as well, that they will give you the best advice and help you guiding those internal teams as you grow. So I think you've done an amazing job within, the time frame that you've been in the industry, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, amazing. I appreciate that. It means a lot, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Yeah, round of applause for all the teams.
Pick of the week, a great team.
A great team, obviously, yes.
I hear a pick of the week in there.
Love it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Mostafa, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday and late in the evening for you. And really, really appreciate having you on and going through that backstory and what you're working on now. And I'm really looking forward to the coming years for Automata and what you're going to do next.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Pleasure. And with that, that's going to conclude episode 20 of the Helical Brew. And we'll have the episode out in a couple of days. And look forward to seeing you next time. We're glad to have you with us. Take care.
Thank you for joining us on the Helical Brew. We're glad to have you with us. For more episodes, please visit our website at helicalbrew.com. That's helicalbrew.com.